All right, and we're on that last little section of uh, compliance and obedience. Here it is. I didn't split it up. We'll just put it together because obedience is pretty short. So, obedience is basically when we perform an action. So, we're writing this down. So, we're performing an action in response to a direct order of an authority figure or a person of higher status. Okay, so I'll say it again. So it's basically when we perform an action in response to a direct order from an authority or a person of higher status. Okay, so that could be anybody that, from teachers, principals, parents, police officers, politicians, uh, social media people, influence. It doesn't matter. It could be anybody that we assume to be of authority or of a higher status. Okay, so this is where we will follow a direct order, right? Because of this, and it's good that we have this obedience. Now, compliance and obedience is different. Obedience tends to be when there's like an authority figure that we will follow the directions or whatever the procedures they want us to do, we tend to follow them. Okay. And so the study that we need to know about is about obedience. And I'm gonna have to show you the video because it does get a little complicated in the sense of like explaining it word for word. You have to see the video for me to explain it. But the study is called Stanley Milgram. It's the Milgram study. It's the guy that did this, and he wanted to study the obedience. And what he really wanted to know is that after World War II, when after the Holocaust, he wanted to understand why normal people, like people that were doctors, teachers, regular Joes, became part of the Nazi Party and they participated in all of these atrocities of, in the Holocaust, and they didn't say anything. Like, even though they knew it was wrong, why didn't they stop? So he wanted to do a study to see is like, what did they do? So his study was that, okay, so you're gonna have a Confederate, which is, and you might want to write this down, there's a Confederate which is part of the study, but he is going to act like a participant. And it's going to use, it was, the Confederate was an older gentleman that mentions, obviously lying, that he has a heart condition. Okay. Now, I'm going to tell you this for this study, and make sure you know this. This is unethical. They cannot do the study again. And they're going to use deception. Okay. Um, they do debrief after because they use deception. However, this study cannot be done because they made the people believe that they were harming someone physically. Okay. And so the way that it worked is you had your Confederate that said he had a heart condition, and then you had your participant. Okay. And I'll show you a video on this. But the participant the directions were that the participant had to read some words, and then the Confederate was in another room far away. You couldn't hear them. I mean, you could hear them, you couldn't see them. And they were attached to like an electrical thing, like electricity. And if they got the answer wrong, like the reading, it was like a memory test, it was all fake, they would get shocked. And every time they got it wrong, they had to increase the voltage. Okay. And there was like this big screen with the voltage, and the way that they worded it like was like extreme, super dangerous, right? And so the Confederate that was in the other room that he was supposed to get the answers wrong on purpose, right? He had a script on getting them wrong and then what to say every time the voltage was increased. Now, the reality is, the deception is that he wasn't getting electrocuted. Like, he wasn't getting electrocuted. He didn't have a heart condition. But as the voltages increased, he kept on saying like, oh my gosh, my heart, this is super stressful, this is, let me out, this and that. So the participants' response is what they were testing, but they had an authority figure, a science, a researcher with a lab coat, and that guy kept on telling him like, no, come on, keep on, you could do this, it's okay, I'll take responsibility. And you see the people so uncomfortable in this, and talk about cognitive dissonance at its finest. And I'll show you a video of them feeling really uncomfortable. um and you'll see that they just keep on, and they're obedient to this authority figure. And even though they say, the participants are like, I don't want to do this anymore, like I want out, they kept on like pushing them to keep on. Now, why this is an unethical study is because they pushed a lot of these participants to go all the way to the last voltage. And if they did that, the the Confederate was supposed to say, like, oh my God, my heart, and then silence. So why is it unethical? It's because the participants believed they killed somebody. So you see them in a emotional and distressed, like, you cannot do that. You cannot allow people to think that they just killed somebody. And it just created an emotional uncomfortableness, like that emotional harm that you're not supposed to do, they did. Okay, so that's why it's unethical to do that. They have done it again, and I believe that they fixed that, because I'm not going to be unethical. Okay, but that was Stanley Milgram, and what they noticed is that men are, I'm sorry, not men, because there is a difference between the gender of what ends up happening. But what they noticed is that since there was an authority figure like the scientists, that people kept on and were willing to obey, because of the figure. Okay, but they also noticed that women tended to be more obedient, and go further than the males of them. Like a lot of males would just stop and be like, I'm not doing this anymore. While they said that the women had, like, were willing to be more obedient. But they also said, like in that study, that some other people have kind of gone against it and said it's because, a lot of times because of social roles and expectations of women, in a society. So that was quite interesting. Um, and then, so you need to know about obedience, and it is highest when? When do we tend to obey? And I's gonna let you know. Okay, so typically we are more obedient when when we're given the orders, when the orders are close at hand, which means like the authority figure is like right there, telling you what to do right in front of you, instead of like from a distance or a phone call or a text. Okay. The next thing that we tend to be obedient is the authority figure is supported by a prestigious institution. Okay. So if you have, and think about it, when we see somebody that is from Yale or Harvard and they're going to come and speak, you're like, oh, they know what they're talking about. Okay. Because we give this prestigious, like these institutes to be like, oh, they're prestigious, they went there, then they must be somebody I should listen to. Another thing that keeps us with our obedience is highest when the victim, or whoever the person is depersonalized, okay, or at a distance. So, for instance, if like what happened in the Holocaust, right? They basically removed the identity of all these people, of these humans. And hold on, this thing is not going. Gotta love technology. Eh, they basically took away all of like the human aspects, and that's why it was easier for a lot of these, people from the not like Nazi party to go against the Jewish people. Okay. Also, if they're at a distance, this is why social media, oh my gosh, um, that's a biggie of if somebody tells you like, oh, let's make fun of them or whatever, sometimes it's easier to do that and obey those rules because you're like, oh, well, they're far away, I can do whatever I want. Like they're not gonna be so like they're not human, right? It's easier that way. Um, and last but not least, and the most important, is that there is no other person that is defiant and going against the authority. So if you see a room that everybody's going against, or I'm sorry, is going with the authority figure and nobody's going like going against them, then people tend to obey as well. And just think of, teachers that you've had experiences with that everybody just listens because they're terrified of the teacher, and even though sometimes like some things are wrong, or any other example, I would love to know that you have experienced this with other authority figures. Okay, and that's basically it for obedience. We'll talk a little bit more, because there is the study of the Stanford Prison Experiment, which kind of goes a lot with the compliance, with obedience, with social groups, roles that we play in society. But for now, that is it. Farewell, guys. I love you. Bye.